Tucson, Arizona, present day. Captain Sarah Martinez woke to the smell of her own skin cooking, Arabic words carving themselves into her shoulder like a branding iron spelling out a 30-year-old death sentence. From the depths of my collection, the War Maestro brings you a tale of 3 American pilots who discovered that some debts follow you home, and the dead keep perfect records of exactly how they died. The Highway of Death began as a military necessity and ended as a slaughter that would haunt the Persian Gulf for decades. On February 26, 1991, coalition forces caught the retreating Iraqi army in a 60-mile traffic jam of stolen vehicles, military hardware, and fleeing soldiers. What started as a tactical bombing mission became something far more sinister when the dying began pointing at the sky, speaking ancient curses with their final breaths. 374 confirmed kills, 0 American casualties. Perfect military execution that violated something deeper than the Geneva Convention. VFA 137 Squadron launched 12 FA-18 Hornets from the USS Midway that morning. Captain Sarah Martinez, callsign Scorpion, led the third wave of strikes against what intelligence designated as retreating hostile forces. Her mission parameters were clear: destroy military vehicles, eliminate command structures, prevent organized retreat into Iraq. What her briefing didn't mention was that many of those vehicles contained Kuwaiti hostages, Palestinian workers, and Iraqi soldiers who had already surrendered hours earlier. The 354th Fighter Squadron's A-10 Thunderbolts arrived next, their GAU-8 cannons designed to punch through Soviet tank armor. Major David Kowalski, flying Warthog 6, made 17 low-level passes over the highway, his depleted uranium rounds shredding everything that moved. Each pass brought him closer to the burning wreckage, close enough to see faces in the smoke, close enough to hear screaming over his engine noise. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb's Apache helicopter from the 1st Armored Division provided close air support, his crew eliminating scattered survivors with precision Hellfire strikes. Through his targeting system, Webb watched heat signatures crawl from destroyed vehicles, watched them raise their hands toward his aircraft in what he assumed was surrender. He was wrong. They were pointing, memorizing, cursing him in languages that predated his civilization. 30 years later, Sarah Martinez woke in her Tucson bedroom to find her flesh burning, not from the outside in, but from her bones outward, as if someone had injected molten metal into her marrow. The pain carved symbols into her left shoulder, Arabic characters that spelled out words she couldn't read, but somehow understood. "We remember you, pilot. We are coming home with you." Her husband found her screaming in the bathroom, clawing at burns that formed perfect patterns, the exact shrapnel wounds from a BTR-60 personnel carrier destroyed by her 3rd Maverick missile. The emergency room doctor found no medical explanation for why her skin was cooking itself from the inside out, or why the burns seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. "Have you been having dreams about the war?" the doctor asked, studying the supernatural wounds that defied every medical textbook. Sarah stared at her reflection in the examination room mirror and saw, for just a moment, the face of a burning Iraqi soldier superimposed over her own. His mouth moved in perfect synchronization with hers. "Not dreams, doctor. Memories. And they're not mine." Sarah's husband, Marcus, found her in the bathroom at 3 a.m., clawing at her shoulder with fingernails bloody from trying to dig the burning words from her flesh. The Arabic characters glowed faintly in the dark, pulsing with each heartbeat like living tattoos etched in pain. "Jesus Christ, Sarah, what happened to you?" Marcus reached for the light switch, but she grabbed his wrist with superhuman strength. "Don't," she whispered, her voice not entirely her own. "They don't like the light. It reminds them of the missiles." The emergency room doctor at Tucson Medical Center had never seen burns like these. They formed perfect geometric patterns, too precise to be accidental, too deep to be self-inflicted. The Arabic script seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at it, shifting and rearranging like living calligraphy. Dr. Patricia Voss had treated burn victims for 15 years, but these wounds defied every medical explanation she knew. The tissue damage suggests extreme heat exposure, but there's no corresponding thermal trauma to the surrounding skin, she explained to Marcus, while Sarah underwent another round of tests. It's as if something burned her from the inside out, targeting only specific nerve clusters. What Dr. Voss didn't mention was that the burn spelled out coordinates: Highway 80, Kuwait, exact latitude and longitude down to the second. 2,000 miles away in Colorado Springs, Major David Kowalski was experiencing his own medical mystery. The retired A-10 pilot had awakened that same night to find his chest cavity filling with what felt like 30-millimeter depleted uranium rounds. Each breath brought the sensation of hot metal tearing through his lungs, liver, and stomach. The pain was so precise he could identify the entry and exit wounds of every round he had fired 30 years ago. His wife found him on the kitchen floor, vomiting blood that contained no actual blood. The dark red liquid evaporated the moment it hit the tiles, leaving behind residue that looked remarkably like desert sand. David tried to explain to the paramedics that he wasn't injured, just experiencing someone else's death wounds, but the words came out in Arabic, a language he had never learned. The VA hospital in Colorado Springs admitted him for psychological evaluation. Post-traumatic stress disorder, they said. Delayed onset combat trauma manifesting as somatic symptoms. Standard veteran mental health crisis. But the attending psychiatrist, Dr. James Morrison, noticed something unusual in David's medical charts. The patient was experiencing internal hemorrhaging in patterns that perfectly matched his own combat mission reports from 1991, reports that had been classified for 3 decades. "Tell me about Highway 80, Dr. Morrison said during their first session. David's eyes rolled back, showing only white. When he spoke, his voice carried the accent of someone who had never left Baghdad. "We remember the sound of your cannon, American pilot, 3,900 rounds per minute. We counted everyone as it tore through our bodies." Meanwhile, in San Antonio, Texas, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb was losing his vision in the exact sequence his victims had experienced their deaths. First, the peripheral flash blindness from Hellfire missile explosions, then the progressive retinal damage from sustained thermal exposure. Finally, the complete darkness that came with death. His ophthalmologist found nothing wrong with his eyes. The retinas were healthy. The optic nerves functioned normally, but Marcus could only see through what he described as other people's memories. He watched his own Apache helicopter attack runs from the ground level, seeing himself through the eyes of dying Iraqi soldiers. The perspective shifts were nauseating. One moment, he was the pilot. The next, he was the target, feeling the helpless terror of watching death approach from the sky. "I can see every face I killed," he told his wife, Elena, during what would be their last normal conversation. "They're all looking up at me, pointing at my aircraft. They're not afraid anymore. They're just waiting." "Waiting for what?" Marcus turned toward her voice, his eyes now completely white, no longer seeing the present world at all. "For the rest of us to come home." The first video call happened at exactly 0347 hours. Sarah's phone rang with a number she recognized but shouldn't have been able to receive. It was David Kowalski's cell phone, calling from inside a Colorado Springs hospital room where David lay sedated and unconscious. "Sarah." The voice wasn't David's. It carried the thick accent of someone who had grown up speaking Arabic. Do you remember February 26th? Do you remember the burning? Through her phone's camera, Sarah could see David's hospital room, but David wasn't alone. Translucent figures in charred military uniforms stood around his bed, their bodies showing the exact wounds her missiles had inflicted. One soldier, his chest cavity opened by shrapnel, leaned over David's sleeping form and whispered something in Arabic. David's mouth moved in perfect synchronization, speaking words he had never learned. "We have been waiting 30 years for this reunion," the voice continued through David's lips. "Your friend experiences our deaths every night. Tonight, we thought you should watch." The figures turned toward the phone's camera, and Sarah saw their faces clearly for the first time. Burned, mangled, destroyed by American ordnance, but their eyes were fully alert and filled with an intelligence that chilled her to the bone. These weren't mindless ghosts. They were organized. They were planning something. "How many of us did you kill, Pilot Martinez?" 73 confirmed. "We have counted carefully. Each soul remembers the moment your weapons found their mark." Sarah tried to hang up, but her phone wouldn't respond. The screen showed impossible things. David's body convulsing as invisible 30-millimeter rounds tore through him repeatedly, each impact making him scream in perfect Arabic. The dead soldiers watched with satisfaction, checking names off a list that seemed to glow with supernatural fire. "Your turn comes soon," they said through David's mouth. "But first, you must understand the debt." The call ended, leaving Sarah staring at her reflection in the black screen. But her reflection wasn't alone. Standing behind her was a figure in a burned Iraqi uniform, pointing directly at her with an accusatory finger that passed through her body like ice. Across the country, Marcus Webb's wife, Elena, found him standing in their backyard, perfectly still, his white eyes fixed on something she couldn't see. He had been sleepwalking again, but this time, he wasn't alone. Neighbors later reported seeing multiple figures in military uniforms, standing in formation around Marcus, all of them pointing upward at the night sky, where an Apache helicopter had once circled 30 years ago. "They're teaching me to see properly," Marcus said, when Elena tried to lead him back inside. "I've been looking through the wrong eyes my whole life. They're showing me what it feels like to watch death coming from above, to know you're going to die and be unable to stop it." His voice carried the same accent as the figures on Sarah's phone call. The dead weren't just haunting them individually. They were coordinating their revenge, sharing information, comparing notes on exactly how each pilot had killed them. How many more pilots were there that day, Elena? How many more debts need to be collected? The reunion happened in Sarah's living room at exactly midnight. Not a physical meeting, but something far worse. The three pilots found themselves connected through a supernatural conference call that bypassed every law of physics and medical science. Sarah sat in her Tucson home, burns spreading across her arms like a roadmap of destruction. David lay in his Colorado hospital bed, coughing up phantom blood that tasted of desert sand. Marcus stood in his San Antonio backyard, his white eyes seeing through the darkness with perfect clarity. None of them had dialed a number, but they could hear each other's voices with crystalline precision. "Can you see them too?" Marcus whispered, his voice carrying across 2,000 miles. "The soldiers standing in formation. They're holding clipboards, checking off names." "They're in my room," David gasped, between waves of internal bleeding that showed no medical cause. 26 of them. Each one shows me exactly how my cannon rounds killed them. The entry wounds, the exit wounds, the trajectory patterns. Sarah watched her reflection in the television screen, but dozens of burned faces now stared back at her. "They're showing me photographs," she said, her voice hollow with recognition. Pictures of families, children. These weren't all soldiers. The supernatural connection carried more than voices. It transmitted memories, sensations, and the gradual realization that their victims had been organizing for 3 decades. The dead had learned English by listening to American radio broadcasts. They had studied military tactics by watching their killers' debriefings. They had prepared for this moment with the patience that only the dead possess. "We know about the others," came a voice that belonged to none of the living pilots. It spoke through all 3 of them simultaneously, turning their reunion into a trial. 47 aircraft participated in the highway operation. We have been collecting the pilots one by one. The room temperature in all 3 locations dropped 20 degrees. Sarah's breath came out in visible puffs as frost formed on her windows. David's heart monitor flatlined for 30 seconds before resuming an erratic rhythm. Marcus felt ice crystals forming in his lungs with each breath. Some have died by suicide, unable to bear the weight of their crimes. Others died in accidents that were not accidents. Car crashes at the exact moment of impact that killed their victims. House fires that burned at the precise temperature of jet fuel. "You're the last 3, the voice continued, and now they could see the speaker. A figure in a charred Republican Guard uniform, standing in all 3 locations simultaneously. His clipboard marked with names, dates, and methods of collection. "But your deaths will be different. You will experience every death you caused in sequence until the debt is paid in full. Sarah Martinez, 73 deaths. David Kowalski, 156 deaths. Marcus Webb, 89 deaths." The connection ended with the sound of aircraft engines and distant screaming, but the pilots remained connected now, bound together by something stronger than friendship or shared trauma. They were linked by a supernatural prosecution that would not end until every debt was paid. The dying began at dawn. Sarah felt the first death at 0600 hours Mountain Time, exactly 30 years and 127 days after her first kill. It wasn't her death. It was his. Private Mahmoud al-Rashid, age 19, Iraqi Republican Guard. Killed by Maverick missile impact. Vehicle 23, Highway 80. Sarah knew his name now because she was living inside his final moments, feeling his terror as her own missile streaked toward his position. She experienced every sensation through his nervous system. The deafening roar of the FA-18 passing overhead. The moment of recognition when he spotted the missile's vapor trail. The desperate scramble toward the vehicle's exit hatch. The millisecond of searing heat before the warhead detonated. Then the explosion. Metal fragments tearing through organs she didn't possess. Burns consuming skin that wasn't hers. The taste of blood and diesel fuel filling lungs that existed only in supernatural memory. But the worst part was the consciousness throughout. Sarah remained fully aware that she was Sarah Martinez, American pilot, even as she died Private al-Rashid's death completely. The experience lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, the precise duration of his dying process 30 years ago. When it ended, Sarah found herself on her kitchen floor, gasping and covered in burns that matched his wounds exactly, but she could feel the others waiting. 72 more deaths, queued up like aircraft in a holding pattern, each one demanding its turn for justice. Meanwhile, David was experiencing his own execution schedule. Staff Sergeant Khalil Nazir, age 24, killed by 30mm cannon fire at 13:47 hours on February 26, 1991. David felt every depleted uranium round punching through Khalil's chest, abdomen, and legs in rapid sequence. The A-10's GAU-8 fired so quickly that the individual impacts blurred together into one continuous tearing sensation. David screamed in his hospital bed as invisible rounds shredded his phantom body. Nurses rushed in to find him bleeding from wounds that weren't there, speaking fluent Arabic despite never learning the language. The heart monitor showed his vital signs matching those of a man dying from massive trauma, even though his body remained physically unharmed. "Why did you not surrender?" David asked the ceiling in Khalil's voice. "We had white flags. We were retreating. Why did you continue killing?" Marcus experienced the death of Lieutenant Fareed Hassan, helicopter pilot, killed by Hellfire missile while attempting to evacuate wounded soldiers. Marcus felt the missile's approach through Hassan's eyes, watched his own Apache helicopter hovering like a mechanical angel of death against the desert sky. The supernatural justice system was precise, methodical, and absolutely merciless. Each pilot would experience every death they had caused, retaining full memory of their victims' final moments, while simultaneously knowing that dozens more executions awaited. 72 to go, Sarah whispered, her body still trembling from Mahmoud's death. She could feel them all now, standing in formation in her living room, each one holding a ticket with a number. They would take turns. They would be patient. They had been waiting 30 years for this moment, and they intended to savor every second of their revenge. By the third day, the pilots had died 17 deaths between them. Sarah's body bore the phantom wounds of 6 different soldiers. David had experienced 11 executions, each one leaving him weaker and more broken. Marcus had endured the deaths of 2 helicopter crews, feeling their terror as his own Hellfire missiles found their targets. But something unexpected happened during Sarah's 7th death. As she experienced the final moments of Corporal Yassin Haddad, she felt something else mixed in with his terror. Forgiveness. "We do not hate you, American pilot." Yassin's voice spoke through her lips as she died his death. "We understand you followed orders, but the debt must still be paid." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. The dead weren't torturing them out of hatred. They were following an ancient law of justice that transcended personal feelings. Each death was a legal proceeding, not a revenge fantasy. "There's another way," Sarah gasped to her supernatural executioners. As Yassin's death finally ended, the law of Qisas allows for forgiveness if the debt is acknowledged and atonement is made. The room filled with the whispered conversations of 318 dead soldiers. They had not expected their killer to understand Islamic jurisprudence. They had not planned for a pilot who would accept responsibility rather than claim innocence. "What do you offer as atonement?" spoke their leader, the burned Republican Guard officer with his supernatural clipboard. Sarah looked directly at him, her eyes blazing with desperate determination. "Our lives, not through your executions, but through our choice. We will return to Highway 80. We will bear witness to what we did. We will tell the world the truth about that day. And if the world refuses to listen, then we will join you. We will become your advocates among the living, carrying your stories until our natural deaths." The dead soldiers considered this proposal in a silence that stretched across 3 cities and 30 years of accumulated rage. Finally, their leader nodded. "The choice is acceptable, but know this, pilots. If you break this oath, if you fail to honor our memory, the executions will resume, and next time, there will be no alternative offered." The supernatural courtroom dissolved, leaving 3 broken pilots connected only by a shared understanding of what they had to do. The dead had given them a chance at redemption, but it would cost them everything they had built since the war. 6 months later, 3 American veterans stood on the scorched asphalt of Highway 80, Kuwait. The desert wind carried whispers in Arabic and the sand beneath their feet was still stained dark after 30 years. Sarah Martinez placed a wreath at coordinates 29.7604 degrees north, 47.9738 degrees east, the exact impact point of her third Maverick missile. Private Mahmoud al-Rashid, she said aloud, reading from the list the dead had given her. 19 years old. Dreamed of becoming a teacher. David Kowalski knelt where his cannon rounds had shredded a medical transport. Staff Sergeant Khalil Nazir, 24 years old, father of 2 daughters he never met. Marcus Webb stood beside the crater from his Hellfire strike. Lieutenant Farid Hassan, helicopter pilot, died trying to save others. They had kept their promise. The documentary aired on 60 networks worldwide. The testimony before Congress had cost them their pensions, their reputations, their comfortable retirement lives. But the executions had stopped. "Can you see them?" Sarah asked, feeling the familiar presence of watching eyes. Marcus nodded, his vision partially restored since accepting the oath. "They're here, all of them, but they're different now." The dead soldiers stood in formation along the highway, no longer pointing an accusation but offering respectful salutes. Their wounds remained visible, but their eyes held peace instead of rage. "The debt is paid," spoke their leader, his voice carrying on the desert wind. "You have honored our memory. You have spoken our names." Sarah felt tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "Will you find peace now?" "We have found something better than peace, American pilot. We have found justice, and through your words, our families finally know how we died." The figures began to fade as the sun set over Kuwait, their forms dissolving into golden light that mixed with the desert wind. But their leader remained a moment longer. "Remember this, pilots. War creates debts that outlive those who fight it. The dead do not forget, but they can forgive if the living choose to remember." The 3 pilots stood alone on Highway 80 as darkness fell, forever changed by their encounter with a justice system older than nations. They had learned that some wounds can only heal when truth replaces silence, and that the dead keep perfect records of exactly how they died. Behind them, the highway stretched into darkness, empty now except for the memories of those who would never leave. If the ghosts of Highway 80 have left their mark on your conscience, it's time to enlist in our archive. Check your reflection in the nearest mirror. Make sure you're the only one staring back. Then subscribe to witness more tales where the past refuses to stay buried. Hit that notification bell, because some debts demand immediate attention when they come due. Share this story with fellow veterans of the supernatural, those who understand that the most terrifying battles are fought long after the ceasefire is signed. And remember, the dead keep perfect records, and they're always recruiting.